When people picture unimaginable wealth, the image that comes to mind for a lot of viewers is a sheikh, gold-trimmed robes, a fleet of supercars, a skyline built on oil money. That image isn't entirely wrong, but it's nowhere near the full picture. The real story of the Arab world's wealthiest sheikhs is a story of sovereign wealth funds, football clubs, global investment portfolios, and business empires that stretch from Manhattan skyscrapers to Silicon Valley startups. Before we count down the list, it's worth being upfront about something. For many of these men, personal fortune and state wealth blur together in ways that make an exact number almost impossible to pin down. A ruler's wealth might be tied up in a sovereign fund that technically belongs to the country, even if he controls it entirely. So every figure you're about to hear is a public estimate, drawn from outlets like Forbes and Celebrity Net Worth, not a bank statement. With that said, let's count down 10 of the wealthiest sheikhs on the planet, from the merely mind-boggling to the almost incomprehensible. It's also worth understanding where all of this wealth actually originates, because it isn't as simple as oil money, even though oil is where the story starts for almost every name on this list. The pattern across the Gulf over the last 50 years has been remarkably consistent. Extract oil and gas revenue, funnel a portion of it into sovereign wealth funds like Abu Dhabi's ADIA and Mubadala or Qatar's QIA, and then use those funds, along with personal holding companies controlled by individual royals, to buy stakes in everything from Western banks to football clubs to emerging technology companies. It's a strategy built for the day the oil eventually runs low, and it's why so many of the fortunes on this list look less like traditional oil wealth today, and more like sprawling global investment portfolios that just happen to have started with oil. Starting at number 10, we have Sheikh Hamdan bin Mohammed Al Maktoum, better known by his nickname Fazza. He's the Crown Prince of Dubai, the son of the Emirates ruler, and arguably the most famous sheikh on social media anywhere in the world, with tens of millions of followers watching his skydiving stunts, his desert horseback rides, and his glimpses into Dubai's royal lifestyle. Publicly estimated figures for his personal net worth sit in the hundreds of millions rather than the tens of billions his older relatives command. Reports have placed it somewhere around $800 million, though that number is almost certainly conservative given how much of Dubai's ruling family wealth isn't disclosed at all. What makes Fazza's inclusion on this list interesting isn't the raw number, it's that he represents the next generation of Gulf wealth, one that's being built as much on image and global brand as it is on oil. At number 9, we move to Qatar and Faisal bin Qassim Al Thani, one of the rare self-made billionaires on this list. Unlike many of the men we'll cover, Faisal didn't inherit his fortune through a direct line to the throne. He built Al Faisal Holding from the ground up, growing it into a sprawling conglomerate with interests in real estate, hospitality, industry, and trading across the Gulf. His estimated net worth sits somewhere in the range of $5 to $6 billion, and what makes him stand out in a region where royal lineage so often determines wealth is that his fortune is almost entirely the product of decades of business decisions rather than a birthright. Number 8 belongs to Sheikh Hamad bin Jassim bin Jabir Al Thani, widely known by his initials, HBJ. He served for years as both Qatar's prime minister and foreign minister, and during that time he built an extraordinary personal investment portfolio through his firm, Al Mirkab Capital, alongside his role steering the Qatar Investment Authority, the country's sovereign wealth fund. HBJ has been described as one of the sharpest dealmakers in the Gulf, with stakes reported in European banks, luxury retailers, and real estate across London and Paris. Estimates of his personal fortune, separate from the state funds he once oversaw, land somewhere around $8 to $9 billion. A number that reflects just how much wealth can be built by someone who spends decades sitting at the intersection of politics and global finance. HBJ's investment style has often been compared to a sovereign wealth fund manager operating with the freedom of a private investor, moving quickly on deals that a government committee might spend years debating, which is part of why his personal portfolio grew so large so quickly during his years in office. At number 7, we have Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani, the reigning Emir of Qatar. As head of state, Tamim's public role is obviously political first. He's the man who brought the 2022 World Cup to Qatar and has positioned the tiny peninsula as one of the most influential players in Middle Eastern diplomacy. His personal net worth, kept carefully separate on paper from the country's massive sovereign wealth fund, has been estimated at around $10 billion. That's a fraction of the hundreds of billions Qatar's state fund controls. But for a single individual, it's still enough to make him one of the wealthiest heads of state anywhere on earth. Number 6 is where the numbers start climbing into a different stratosphere. Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan, universally known by his initials, MBZ, the President of the United Arab Emirates and the country's most powerful figure. Before becoming president, MBZ spent decades building influence through Abu Dhabi's government and its network of investment vehicles, and while a clean, isolated personal net worth figure is notoriously difficult to pin down, given how tightly his wealth is intertwined with the Emirates' sovereign holdings, estimates from various outlets have placed his personal fortune anywhere from $10 to $20 billion. What's not up for debate is his influence. As the man effectively steering Abu Dhabi's investment strategy for years before taking the presidency, MBZ has had his hand on some of the largest pools of capital in the world. At number 5, we're introducing someone whose fortune is uniquely hard to estimate for a different reason entirely. Sheikh Tahnoon bin Zayed Al Nahyan, the UAE's national security advisor and one of Abu Dhabi's most powerful financial figures. Tahnoon chairs both Royal Group, a sprawling private conglomerate, and the International Holding Company, or IHC, which in just a few years has grown into one of the most valuable listed companies in the entire Middle East. Because so much of his wealth is tied up in stakes across dozens of companies rather than sitting in one clean personal account, public estimates vary enormously, but multiple reports have suggested his effective net worth could rival, or even exceed that of some of the more publicly tracked billionaires on this list, potentially reaching well into the tens of billions, once you account for his stakes across IHC's portfolio companies. He's a reminder that some of the biggest fortunes in the Gulf are the ones that get the least public attention. Unlike Sheikh Mansour, whose ownership of Manchester City put a very public face on his wealth, Tahnoon has built his empire almost entirely out of the spotlight, through board seats, holding structures, and strategic stakes that rarely make international headlines the way a Premier League title race does. That contrast between the sheikhs who become globally famous through sports and headlines, and the ones who quietly amass comparable or greater fortunes through corporate structures most people have never heard of, runs through this entire list. Number 4 brings us outside the UAE and Qatar entirely, to Saudi Arabia and Prince Alwaleed bin Talal Al Saud, chairman of Kingdom Holding Company. Alwaleed is technically a prince rather than a sheikh by formal title, but he's so frequently grouped alongside the region's wealthiest royal figures in global coverage that leaving him off a list like this would be a mistake. His story is famous for a reason. He turned an early loan into one of the most recognizable investment portfolios on the planet, with stakes over the years in companies like Citigroup, Twitter, and Four Seasons Hotels. Forbes' Middle East's most recent ranking put his net worth at just under $20 billion, making him not just one of the richest men in Saudi Arabia, but consistently the single richest individual on Forbes' entire list of wealthy Arabs. At number 3, we're back in Dubai with the man who actually rules it, Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum, Vice President and Prime Minister of the UAE and the ruler of Dubai. If you've ever seen a photo of the Burj Khalifa or the man-made Palm Islands, you've seen a project connected to Sheikh Mohammed's vision for transforming Dubai from a modest trading port into one of the most recognizable skylines in the world. He owns the overwhelming majority of Dubai Holding, the conglomerate behind much of that transformation, and his personal net worth has been estimated at around $16 to $18 billion. Beyond the business empire, Sheikh Mohammed is also known for one of the most extravagant weddings in modern history. His 1979 wedding, reportedly cost around $100 million in today's money, complete with a month-long celebration and a stadium built specifically to host 20,000 guests. Number 2 takes us to a name most sports fans will recognize instantly, even if they've never thought about his business empire. Sheikh Mansour bin Zayed Al Nahyan, Vice President and Deputy Prime Minister of the UAE. To most of the world, he's known as the owner of Manchester City, the Premier League club he transformed from a mid-table team into one of the most dominant forces in European football after acquiring it in 2008. But that's genuinely one of the smaller pieces of his portfolio. Sheikh Mansour has chaired some of Abu Dhabi's largest financial institutions over the years, and his estimated net worth of around $30 billion places him not just among the richest sheikhs in the world, but among the wealthiest individuals on the planet, period. It's worth noting that Sheikh Mansour and Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum, our number 3 entry, are actually family. Mansour is married to one of Sheikh Mohammed's daughters, tying Abu Dhabi's and Dubai's ruling families even closer together, which brings us to the top spot. Although, in keeping with the theme of this entire list, it comes with an asterisk. If we're counting personal net worth as it's typically reported, Sheikh Mansour holds the highest publicly cited figure of any individual carrying the Sheikh title. But if you widen the lens to informal wealth, tied up in unlisted holding companies and cross-shareholdings, several financial analysts believe Sheikh Tahnoon bin Zayed's influence over IHC's ballooning valuation could technically put him ahead, even if the exact number is nowhere near as cleanly documented. That ambiguity is really the perfect way to close out this list, because it captures something true about wealth at this level in the Gulf. The biggest fortunes aren't always the best-known ones, and the men controlling the largest pools of capital on Earth are often the ones who've spent decades deliberately staying out of the spotlight, letting their holding companies and board seats do the talking instead of interviews or headlines. So, what do all 10 of these stories add up to? A picture of Gulf wealth that's a lot more complicated than gold-plated supercars and private islands, even if those things do exist somewhere in nearly every one of these portfolios. Some of these fortunes were inherited through bloodlines that stretch back to the founding of their countries. Others were built, deal, by men who happened to be born into privilege but chose to spend decades compounding it into something far larger. And running underneath nearly every name on this list is the same quiet engine: sovereign wealth funds, strategic government positions, and a willingness to reinvest oil-era fortunes into everything from football clubs to tech startups to entire skylines. It's a reminder that in today's Gulf, being a sheikh isn't just an inherited title anymore. It's increasingly a full-time job running some of the largest and most sophisticated investment operations on the planet. The men on this list didn't just inherit oil wells. They inherited the responsibility of turning finite resources into permanent, diversified wealth, and by most measures, they've succeeded spectacularly. From Manchester City's trophy cabinet, to the man-made islands off Dubai's coast, to stakes in some of the biggest names in Silicon Valley, the fingerprints of Gulf sheikh wealth are now scattered across nearly every major industry on the planet: banking, aviation, hospitality, sports, and increasingly, the technology companies shaping the next several decades. And if the last decade is anything to go by, this list is only going to get more expensive to make the cut. Thanks for watching. If you want more breakdowns of the world's wealthiest royals, tycoons, and business dynasties, hit subscribe. There's a lot more of this world left to uncover.